Eurokomisár pre právny štát, demokraciu a spravodlivosť Michael McGrat je aktuálne na návšteve Slovenska, aby posúdil stav právneho štátu, od ktorého závisia aj eurofondy. Stretol sa s mnohými predstaviteľmi od Roberta Fica až po Maroša Žilinku. O tomto sa dnes budeme rozprávať v relácii Na rovinu. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter.
You met with a lot of people, starting from the Prime Minister Fico, Ministers of Justice and Interior, the General Prosecutor, many others. What have you learned?
It's been a pretty intense couple of days, but it comes at a good time because we are preparing the Rule of Law report for 2026 and we will finalise it and adopt it and publish it by July. So we have been doing a stock take of last year's report, looking at the recommendations, listening to all of the stakeholders and then considering what we need to include for 2026. So our evaluation will continue for the next number of weeks and then we will make our final decisions just in advance of publication in early July. But hopefully we'll have a chance to go into some of the specific issues, the open infringements that we have and so on.
Of course,
because those were very important in our discussions.
So how did our officials like Prime Minister Fico and Minister Šuta Eštok and Mr. Susko convince you with their arguments?
Well, in relation to the Whistleblower Protection Office, we have acknowledged the progress that has been made through the repeal of the legislative amendment and the reinstatement of the previous legal framework. So, in other words, the whistleblower protections that are in place will continue. That is a welcome step. We have to examine and make sure that all of that is fully done before we can discontinue the infringement process. But the indications are positive that it is a full reinstatement of the whistleblower protections, and that's vitally important. On the second open issue, which is quite recent, relates to the constitutional amendments, and our discussions will continue. We issued a letter of formal notice to the Slovak government. They have responded, and while we are still considering that response, at this moment in time, our concerns are not fully addressed. I conveyed this to the Prime Minister directly, but we remain open for dialogue, and that's why it was a good opportunity to be here to engage directly with him as head of government, with other senior ministers, and indeed with members of Parliament as well, so that I could explain what the position of the European Commission is, that we're not encroaching on areas of national competence. Matters to do with substantive family law are a matter for the Slovakian government. However, our analysis is that the particular wording in the constitutional amendments do raise serious questions about respect for the primacy of EU law. And we were able to go through that, explain our perspective, and also make it clear that we are open for dialogue, but we do need to see a resolution to this matter.
Mm-hmm. What was your impression of Mr. Robert Fico and the meeting with him? Because he wrote on social media about the meeting with you that he complained to you about quotation marks trauma from 2020 to 23 violations of rule of law, and referred to traffic accidents of former special prosecutor and former chief of specialized court. Did this really happen? Did he really say that?
So I can't control the account of a meeting that another person may give, but I can give my own account, which I know
I'm just verifying whether he said that or not.
Which I know to be accurate, and the fact is that the discussion focused on the constitutional amendments and also on the whistleblower protections, and yes, on rule of law, where we did have a good discussion of the rule of law report last year, the assessment that we are currently doing for 2026. But it's a matter for the Prime Minister to give his own account or version of the meeting. But I was focused then, as I am now, on the substantive policy matters that we have to deal with as a Commission, including full respect for EU law.
But did he really, did he really say that, or did he not?
I'm not going to go into individual specific points that may or may not have been made. We did discuss rule of law in some detail, but my focus is on the substantive policy areas where we want to support the Slovakian government to achieve greater progress.
So The European Commission issues the rule of law report every year. So if Robert Fico claims that there was some violation or huge violations of rule of law in Slovakia in 2020 to 23, it can be checked for reality in the rule of law reports. So is it worse now than it was in 2020 to 23, or is it true what Robert Fico said that we had trouble before?
Well, the rule of law report process is a relatively recent development. It's only over the last 5 to 6 years that there has been an annual rule of law report. It has been evolving over that period of time with the inclusion of recommendations, for example, and more recently the inclusion of 4 enlargement countries as well. But each year we go through a rigorous process of meeting, yes, the government, but also other political stakeholders, non-government organisations, civil society, media organisations, judicial authorities, prosecutorial bodies, and so on, so that we get the full breadth of perspectives on all of the different issues, and we are led by the evidence, and the report that we publish every year represents the objective evaluation of the European Commission.
That's why I'm asking.
It's open to criticism, as is the case every year by different stakeholders, but it is our objective analysis. I've been through it now for just 1 year, the 2025 report. I can stand over the content of that report because I know the rigour that we applied to it, and I think it's unfair to do a direct comparison from 2021 or 2022 versus 2025. Every year is different, but it's there in black and white. People can read the report, read the recommendations, read the account that we give of whether the recommendations from last year were followed up or not, and they can draw their own conclusions. And it's clear from looking at the report last year in the case of Slovakia that there was work to do, and that's why we're here and we're having these meetings and we're having good, direct, frank engagement with the key stakeholders to try to achieve progress.
Yeah, I do have the report here, and I will show it on camera because all these yellow sentences begin with no progress. So like no progress was reached. This and that. That really speaks of something about the last report. And Mr. Fico, he appears to care about what you write in the rule of law report, because as I understand it if I understand it correctly, if the country does not fulfill the standards of rule of law, European money can be frozen or withdrawn. So is this the purpose of your visit, to basically establish whether the situation is so serious in Slovakia with the rule of law that you could maybe freeze the European funds?
Well, we have a rule of law toolbox that applies to all the member states of the European Union. It does involve the conditionality mechanism, for example, which has been invoked, as you know, in relation to Hungary. We also have the Charter Horizontal Enabling Condition, again, which is an important and relevant instrument that can be used in certain circumstances to slow or even to stop the flow of certain funding, depending on conditions. As you know, we have a Recovery and Resilience Plan, which is part of Next Generation EU, and as part of that, there are super milestones, conditions in effect, that must be honoured in order for the flow of funds to continue. And this isn't some accounting exercise. It is about ensuring that rule of law is respected throughout the European Union. I think this is what our citizens expect and deserve, and respect for rule of law is foundational to the European Union. It is a core value of membership, and it's a binding obligation that doesn't end when you enter the door of the EU. It continues right through your membership, and that's why we have a rigorous process that can involve those instruments I've mentioned. It can also involve Article 7, which has been invoked again only in relation to Hungary so far, and we have what in many ways is the ultimate sanction, and that is an infringement procedure. And we have seen fit, as you know, into 2 instances that we've already discussed, to go down that road. And in the case of the whistleblower protections, hopefully we will be in a position to discontinue based on the repeal of those amendments. But the work must continue in relation to the constitutional amendments, because respect for the primacy of EU law is not a la carte. It's not an option. It's a binding obligation of EU membership.
Okay. I understand that, but the infringements, that it takes some time before the court will decide. Yeah. So it seems not to be a really pressing issue for the Prime Minister Fico, because maybe the next government is going to pay for those mistakes if the court will decide that way. But the resilience plan, that seems to have worked with the whistleblower's office, because the government does not even hide the fact they revoked the law because the payment from the resilience plan was postponed. It was around 600 million. So is this the only thing that really works if you want to try influence something in Slovakia?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't downplay the significance of infringement proceedings. They are a serious matter. We can, as a Commission, seek interim measures from the Court of Justice, and where at the end of a process the Commission is deemed to have won its case, and if the Member State does not fall into line and abide by the judgment, there can eventually be the imposition of financial penalties. So it is an important instrument we have. It's not one that we use lightly. But the Recovery and Resilience Plan is, without question, a useful way of ensuring that important conditions are complied with. And I think it's only fair and appropriate that where EU taxpayers' money is being made available to a member state of the European Union, that basic rules around respect for EU laws is ensured. And that is what we always seek to do. And as I said, we acknowledge and welcome the change in the law that has now been provided for in terms of the reinstatement of the full set of whistleblower protections. That's an important matter, and we welcome it.
My question was, is this something that you just realized that this really works?
As you know, we have made a proposal in the context of the next 7-year EU budget, a multi-annual financial framework, to build an even closer link between respect for rule of law and the Charter of Fundamental Rights with access to EU funding. And President von der Leyen has been very clear and strong on this point, that respect for rule of law is a must for access to EU funds. The exact proposal that we have made is going to be the subject of intense negotiations over the months ahead with the co-legislators, in particular with the member states, and of course Slovakia will be one voice in that, and there are other member states that also have strong views on this issue, and we look forward to engaging in those negotiations.
Mm-hmm. In the Rule of Law report, also in one of your videos on the social media, you have spoken about high level of corruptions and that we need mechanism to tackle that. This was the topic of the conflict between Prime Minister Fico and the General Prosecutor, Mr. Žilinka, that you have also met. And it was about the Rule of Law report. Mr. Fico wanted the General Prosecutor to kind of change his evaluation that he submits for your Rule of Law report. And Mr. Žilinka did not want to do that, and he also publicly said that the fight against the corruption is catastrophic, especially at the high level. Did he tell the same to you?
We had a very good meeting with the Prosecutor General, and it is the case in Slovakia and in every other member state. The independence of the Prosecutor General must be respected, because it's an important part of the criminal justice architecture and is an essential ingredient. We will be examining the data in terms of the track record of high-level corruption cases, detection, investigation, indictment, and indeed conviction rates. So that forms part of our evaluation now, because it is an outstanding recommendation from 2025, the need for there to be a track record of tackling high-level corruption, and the role of the police, the role of the Prosecutor General is important. As you know, we have already seen the abolition of the Special Prosecution Council and of the National Crime Agency, NACA. It's a matter for the Member State to organise its affairs in the way that it sees fit in terms of investigating corruption, but we do need to see results, and we need to see checks and balances in place that respect the independence of the different arms and the different points along the chain, and that's the important point. And we will be casting a very close eye on that particular recommendation when we finalise our evaluation in the coming weeks for Slovakia.
Okay, as I have already mentioned, there's a lot of no progress in the previous report. So from one report to another one, there was no progress. So what if it happens again? It's going to be only written in the report, or are there some kind of concrete steps that you are going to do for this situation not to be repeated?
Yeah, so I have outlined the concrete or hard tools, as you might describe them, that we do have at our disposal. We have to use them judiciously. We have to be fair and proportionate, and we do have to follow due process. We ourselves must respect the rule of law, recognise what the national competences are, but also recognise what our role is as the Commission and as the guardian of the treaties. I always believe that dialogue should come first. That's why I'm here in Slovakia, to have that direct engagement, to put questions to the authorities, to the government and to others, and to gain a very close and personal understanding of the rule of law environment here on the ground in Slovakia. So it's been a very productive couple of days, but we will now reflect on everything that we have heard and that we've learned over the last couple of days, and it will build on a country visit that my officials did virtually, a virtual country visit last month, where they had many meetings with key stakeholders, and now we've been here in person this week. And so our work will continue, and the outcome of that work will be known in July.
Okay, so there's one more issue that I wanted to ask you about. It's the case of EU money. They were from the schemes to support travel, but they were used for financing luxury housing of a group of people around the Smer party. Several members of European Parliament have investigated into the matter, especially Financial Control Committee, but the Slovak government said, well, it has no consequences if there is some report of Financial Committee of the European Parliament. Did you discuss this matter with the Slovak officials as well? Will there be consequences?
Well, we have an architecture within the European Union where specific bodies have the responsibility for investigating and dealing with such issues. As you know, we have the European Public Prosecution Office, we have OLAF, we have the European Ombudsperson in addition to the national one, we have the European Court of Auditors, we have the role of the European Parliament. So we do have bodies in place to provide oversight and also with executive authority to actually investigate and to deal with cases. So it's not for me as an individual commissioner, or indeed for the Commission, to lead on investigating specific allegations of wrongdoing. That is for the relevant bodies, okay. And I trust them to discharge their executive responsibilities.
I understand. In your report, there is also a chapter about media freedom. So now there is a European Media Freedom Act that I know that Slovakia is at some points in a direct violation of it, especially when it comes to public service media, because the bodies governing the institution, they're full of governmental nominees or the nominees of the coalition. There's nobody independent. So according to EMFA, it should be independent. It is not. So therefore I see the direct violation there. But you have not started infringement in this matter yet. Am I right?
We are in a pre-infringement dialogue with Slovakia at the moment in relation to the European Media Freedom Act. The European Media Freedom Act must be fully implemented in all the member states of the European Union. It has direct effect, as you know, and it substantially came into effective operation in August of last year. So under this EU pilot mechanism, we are in that dialogue with the Slovakian authorities, and depending on the outcome, the progress or lack thereof, we will then decide on next steps. But it is again not an option for any member state of the European Union to disregard the European Media Freedom Act. It is a crucial instrument to ensure media freedom, to ensure the independence of public service media, to ensure the safety of journalists, which I don't need to tell you how important that issue is, and we will be updating our recommendation in relation to the safety of journalists as well. And we will ensure that all of the member states fully implement the European Media Freedom Act, including Slovakia.
I've discussed already this with previous Commissioner, Ms. Jourova, in the studio, and I asked the same question. Isn't it going to be too late when you make sure it is implemented and maybe start infringement and etc.? Because those people, those critical journalists from the public service media, they are repeatedly laid off. Right now, as we speak, all the critics are being laid off. So they might have relied on EMFA, and did not the EU let them down?
Well, we are in ongoing contact with the member states in relation to the implementation of EMFA. It is in application effectively since August of last year, and it is not acceptable for member states to not implement the provisions of the European Media Freedom Act. I can assure you that this is a political priority for me as Commissioner, and indeed it is for the team within DG Connect, who have official responsibility within the service for this issue. And we are also going to ensure that the anti-SLAPP directive, which must be transposed by May, so in the coming weeks, and we need to ensure that all of the member states fully transpose the anti-SLAPP directive too, because that's another crucial instrument. But we would like member states to go further and to make sure that within their own domestic laws that they do also provide for a strong anti-SLAPP deterrence. We cannot force them to do so. We can only insist on it in the context of cross-border matters, because that's where our competence meets its limit. But we do believe that they should go further, and we will be engaging with them on that Commission recommendation also.
Another issue in the media law is the National Media Authority. The coalition is pushing forward legislation that will centralize the power in hands of one person, the head of the institution, instead of some collective board. So can we expect similar pressure from the European Commission as we have seen with the whistleblower's office? Or this time it's going to be more complicated because this is not the direct condition of recovery plan?
Well, this is proposed legislation that is not yet agreed or adopted by the National Council. It has come up in discussions over the last couple of days, and concerns have been expressed by different stakeholders. We take careful note of that. We will be monitoring developments over the weeks ahead, and of course we'll have to assess it then alongside the obligations that are there in law under the European Media Freedom Act and any other relevant pieces of legislation. So I can't give you a final determination on a draft law that is yet to be adopted, but we are aware of it and we are monitoring developments and will act accordingly once we have our evaluation of a final piece of legislation completed.
Okay, last thing, can we in general say what is the reputation of the Slovak government in Brussels?
Slovakia is a respected member state of the European Union. It's an important partner for us in the European Commission. We hold Slovakia to the exact same standard that we hold every other member state of the European Union. The focus of this visit is on rule of law matters, but we are doing the rule of law report for every single member state of the European Union. You have called out there the lack of progress that we reported last year in the rule of law report, and I want to be in a position come July to be able to present a different report, a report that highlights that we have made progress. And my visit here is to demonstrate goodwill on the part of the European Commission, that we are here to assist and support. I always say to member states that the rule of law process should not be viewed in an adversarial fashion, because I have huge respect for the expertise and experience of my own team, of my service in DG Just. They have the panoramic view of the entire European Union, and they can bring their expertise and experience in support of member states that want to embrace positive reforms and want to have a strong rule of law environment. So we will arrive at the conclusions that the evidence leads us to in the case of Slovakia and in the case of all of the other member states, and I look forward to concluding our assessment and bringing forward a report in July, and that will speak for what what the view is of Slovakia on rule of law matters, which is my area of competence.
The reason why I asked about the reputation of Slovakia is because the Slovak government, if they receive visits, they receive criticism from the EU, or the funds being frozen, the response of the government usually is it is a punishment for a different opinion, maybe about, I don't know, pro-Russian sanctions or other things that occasionally Slovakia backs Hungary in blocking them. So is it a punishment?
I don't believe there's any evidence of that whatsoever. I think the evidence is the opposite, that I am here as Commissioner to engage and to have dialogue with the government, which I have had at the highest level over the last couple of days, but also with others. We will be impartial and completely objective in our analysis, and that's the way that it should be. We too have to be consistent. We have to be consistent in our application of the rule of law in the European Union, and we stand ready to support Slovakia and all of the other member states. But I underline the fact that respect for rule of law is not à la carte. It is a core binding obligation of EU membership for Slovakia and for the other 26 member states of the European Union too.
So if it is violated, we will see. It is yet to see what the European Commission will do.
Well, we have our tools, and we have demonstrated a willingness to use our tools in the case of Slovakia and in the case of other member states. Dialogue comes first, but dialogue must lead to positive change and to results. And in the event where it doesn't lead to such positive change and results and compliance with EU law, then we have no other option but to act. We are the guardian of the EU treaties, and it is a fundamental obligation that we must uphold in the interest of all EU citizens across the 27 member states.
Okay, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you, Peter.